This week, Congressman Gabe Amo held the Secretary of State to a year-old promise, 10 times more food aid than any country. The numbers, since then, cuts of more than half, 23,000 American jobs gone, a 7-month-old infant named Santina, who did not survive in a Kenyan refugee camp. Amo asked, "Were you misleading us?" So, watch the exchange, and our research team will break down the full analysis at the end.
Secretary Rubio, welcome back. I want to start where we left off last year. You told me, quote, "We're going to do more food aid than any country on the planet times 10. That was your promise. But the facts tell a different story. America might still be the world's largest food aid donor, but we certainly don't provide 10 times more food aid than our peers. In fact, under your watch, America's food aid contributions have been cut by more than half to roughly $2 billion. It should be very clear that America's strength has never come solely from our might. It comes from our alliances, our credibility, and our values. You didn't just eliminate programs, you created vacuums. Vacuums where violence and instability are rising, that extremist groups are filling, that competitors like China are exploiting, and vacuums that are making Americans less safe and less prosperous. And you hurt Americans here at home with your policy decisions. Shuttering USAID wiped out more than 23,000 American jobs, while Donald Trump and his billionaire buddies got rich off of corrupt deals. Peanut farmers in Texas and sugar farmers in your home state of Florida lost market access because of your cuts. So Secretary Rubio, before slashing food aid programs, did you conduct any analysis whatsoever on how many American jobs would be lost, how many farms would be hurt, and how much damage would be done to local economies and small businesses?
Well, because we know all of those will still be part of the new programs we've created and are creating. But the second point I would make, American foreign aid programs are not a jobs program. Although they employ Americans, and we want it to be helpful to Americans, and that's why.
So you're okay hurting the farmers in your home state?
The World Food for Peace program, for example, now we've transferred it to the Agriculture Department. They're in a better position.
Well, you're talking about a hypothetical future where you fix past mistakes, but farmers have been struggling over the last year.
That's where it belonged in the first place, because it's helpful. The farmers have more direct input there than they would at the State Department. As to your point about us cutting aid, not only are we we donate more than the next 4 countries combined. We do more than anybody else.
But we went down, and there are consequences. Look. From where I sit,
but why are we in charge of feeding everybody?
This is not about charity. This is about our economy and values. I didn't say that you got to do it all, but you can't cut when you know without analysis that bad things are going to happen.
But we replaced. We have new programs that are actually working better.
Well, Mr. Secretary, if I may, from where I sit, you, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, you got together, you made these cuts blindly because you did not say that you conducted any analysis. You just said we cut because we have a hypothetical future that we are trying to create, which is not a serious plan. And that's not regard for the economic damage to our farmers, to our small businesses here at home who are feeling that pain. And moreover, you've had lives lost. And I want to get to that point. I want to introduce you to Mary Sunday. She is behind me, and after your food aid cuts decimated the World Food Program's ability to feed the Kenyan refugee camp she lived in, Mary's 7-month-old daughter, Santina, died of malnutrition. This is the only photo Santina's parents have of their daughter. Before Santina died, you looked me in the eye in this room, and you said, "No children are dying on my watch." She was a child. She had a name, a family, a future ahead. Now she's gone. She is one of over 500,000 children who died last year after your administration pulled the plug. Yesterday, I heard your testimony. You said you're seeking outcomes with foreign aid programs, but the outcome that I see is dead kids. So, Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you again, and with a real direct answer, please. Were you lying to Congress when you claimed no children were dying on your watch, or did you simply never bother to calculate the human cost of your decisions?
That number you're throwing around is a false number. It's a false number. And not only that, you're equivocating that the death of an individual is responsibility of the United States.
There are 500,000 others.
No, that's a false.
Mr. Secretary, the numbers are there.
No, the numbers are not there. The numbers are opinion of experts
you have
who got
a narrative
their
to share.
cut.
Mr. Chairman, I want to enter into the record these articles that show last year alone, over 155,000 children died from malnutrition. Over 126,000 children died from diarrheal diseases. Over 165,000 children died from pneumonia as a result of these cuts. So here's the deal. You promised more food aid. Instead, there were cuts. You promised America first and said American workers, who you said aren't a priority for you. You said it's not a jobs program. They lost their jobs. You promised strength. Instead, we have lost influence, credibility, and trust. And you promised children weren't going to die. You said that to me right here. You promised peace as well. Instead, your illegal war of choice with Iran is driving up fuel prices and grocery costs while putting millions more at risk of hunger worldwide. This is not about charity. This is about values. So whether it's negligence or ideology, the result under your watch is the same. Weaker alliances, higher costs, dead children, and a less secure America.
result is
so
we
my
spend
so
more
my
money
que-
than-
my time is expiring. So I'm going to take these seconds to say, what are you going to do to clean up the mess that you
Representative's
created?
time has expired. Representative Davidson is recognized.
What made this exchange land was that it was anchored to a specific promise. Congressman Gabe Amo opened by quoting a statement the secretary had made in this same room a year earlier. The promise was that the United States would do, in his words, 10 times more food aid than any other country. Amo did not need to argue about whether that promise had been made. The video record was clear. The promise was on tape. The exchange that followed was about measuring the promise against the result. Promises in congressional testimony are not casual. They become benchmarks. They get cited in future hearings. Amo was citing this one. The secretary had to engage with it as the marker it had become, not as a one-time line. Amo's opening numbers were specific. American food aid contributions in his framing have been cut by more than half. The current figure he cited was roughly $2 billion. He acknowledged that the United States remains the world's largest food aid donor. That is an important concession. It tells the audience that Amo was not arguing the country has abandoned food aid. He was arguing that the country has scaled it back substantially, and that the gap between the prior promise and the current reality is the part that deserves examination. The secretary did not contest the headline number. He shifted the frame toward what the cuts achieved and toward new programs the administration is standing up. That is a legitimate counter. It is also a different conversation than the one Amo opened. Amo's second specific number was about American jobs. He said shuttering the United States Agency for International Development had wiped out more than 23,000 American jobs. That number, like the food aid number, was offered as a specific receipt. It moves the discussion from abstract policy preferences toward measurable domestic impact. The Secretary's response was that American foreign aid is not a jobs program. That is technically correct. Foreign assistance is meant to serve foreign policy goals, not employment goals. But it is also true that any program of that scale employs Americans. When the program is restructured, those jobs are restructured too. The hearing record now includes the specific number, the specific response, and the specific tension between them. Amo then introduced an additional domestic constituency: peanut farmers in Texas, sugar farmers in Florida. He noted that those farmers had lost market access because of the cuts. The reference to Florida was deliberate. It is the Secretary's home state. By naming those constituencies, Amo was attaching the policy decision to specific groups of Americans whose livelihoods depend on the food aid system. The Secretary did not dispute the impact in detail. He argued that the new programs being created would still involve those producers, and that the World Food for Peace program had been transferred to the Department of Agriculture, where farmers have more direct input. That is a defensible administrative argument. Amo's counter is that the farmers are not living in a hypothetical future. They are absorbing the cost now. The hardest moment of the exchange came when Amo introduced a person who was in the room. Her name is Mary Sunday. She lived in a Kenyan refugee camp where the World Food Program operates. Her 7-month-old daughter, named Santina, died of malnutrition after the cuts diminished the camp's food supply. Amo held up a photo. He said the photo was the only one Santina's parents had of their daughter. He reminded the secretary that, in this same room, the secretary had once said no children would die on his watch. That moment changed the tone of the entire hearing. The exchange went from a policy dispute to a human accounting. The hearing record now includes the name of a specific child. Amo placed Santina inside a much larger figure. He said she was one of over 500,000 children who died last year after the administration pulled the plug on the program. That number is contested. The secretary called the number false, and he is entitled to that position. Estimates of deaths attributable to a specific aid cut are difficult to produce, easy to dispute, and politically loaded. The disagreement is real. But the framing matters. Amo did not say the United States killed those children. He said the United States stopped feeding them and they died. That is a different and more defensible claim. The country can examine the evidence. The hearing now contains both the figure and the rebuttal in the same passage. Amo then asked the question that will be quoted from this exchange for a long time. He asked whether the secretary had been lying to Congress when he claimed no children would die on his watch, or whether he had simply never calculated the human cost of his decisions. That is a tight binary. It is also a fair binary. The secretary made a public promise. The public promise has not held up to the available reporting from the relevant camps. Either the public promise was made without honest belief, or it was made without an analytical basis. The secretary rejected the framing. He called the death figure false. He argued the new programs were already working better than the old ones. The exchange ended with the binary on the table and unanswered. The secretary's strongest line of defense was relative scale. He said the United States still donates more food aid than the next 4 countries combined. That is true on the available public data. America remains the world's largest donor by a wide margin even after the cuts. That fact does not refute Amo's argument. It complicates it. The argument is not about whether the United States is generous in absolute terms. It is about whether a specific commitment made in this room was kept. A country can be the largest donor in the world and still have broken a specific promise made a year earlier. The exchange asked the country to hold 2 true facts in mind at the same time. The secretary also made an argument about international burden sharing. He asked, rhetorically, why the United States should be in charge of feeding everybody. That is a real question that has been debated for decades. There is a genuine policy case for distributing the cost of global food aid across more donors, including wealthy countries that do not currently pull their weight. Amo did not dispute the case. He said he had never argued that the United States should do everything. He drew the line at making the cuts without an analysis of who would be harmed. The secretary's burden-sharing argument is durable across administrations of both parties. Amo's analysis requirement is also durable. The two are not in fundamental conflict. The conflict is over whether the analysis was done. Amo's central claim, repeated through the exchange, was that the cuts were made blindly. He named the secretary, the president, and Elon Musk as the participants. He said the cuts proceeded without any documented analysis of the impact on American farmers, small businesses, or vulnerable people abroad. That is a specific procedural complaint. It can be tested. Internal memoranda, briefing books, and impact analyses either exist or they do not. If they exist, the administration can release them and resolve the question. If they do not, the original allegation becomes harder to refute. Either outcome is informative. The exchange did not produce a yes or no on whether the analysis happened. The question is now part of the record. There is a procedural reason this matters. Whether the analysis was done is not a question the country has to take on faith. It is a question that can be answered by document production. House committees can request internal impact assessments. Inspectors general can subpoena them. Journalists can file freedom of information requests. The administration can voluntarily release them. The question Amo asked is the kind of question that, in the normal life of an oversight investigation, gets answered eventually. The secretary's testimony today will be measured against whatever documents emerge. That is why the procedural angle of this exchange is more durable than the rhetorical angle. The rhetoric will fade. The documents, if they exist, will be findable. There is a reason Amo introduced Santina by name. Policy debates often live in aggregate numbers. Aggregate numbers are necessary, but they are also abstract. The country cannot hold 1 million points of suffering in mind at one time. It can hold one. By naming the child, showing the photograph, and identifying the camp, Amo made the policy concrete. That is a venerable congressional move. It has been used by members of both parties for generations. It does not turn an argument into a fact. It does anchor an argument to a real person, which makes the argument harder to dismiss as abstract politics. The hearing record now contains a name. That name will be cited in future oversight discussions about this program. The secretary's framing throughout the exchange was that the old programs have been replaced with new ones and that the new ones are working better. That is a serious claim. It is also a claim that takes time to verify. Whether the new programs are actually working better than the old ones is something that can be measured. Aid delivery metrics, cost per beneficiary, speed of response to acute crises, coordination with partner countries. All of those can be tracked. None of them can be evaluated in real time during a 5-minute exchange. The secretary is asking the country to extend trust until the new programs have a track record. Amo is asking the country to look at the people who have already absorbed the cost in the interim. The follow-up reporting on this exchange will likely focus on three streams of documentation. The first is the internal impact analyses that, if they exist, would address whether the cuts were studied before they were made. The second is the memoranda that transferred specific programs, including the World Food for Peace program, from the State Department to the Department of Agriculture. The third is the casualty reporting from the field operations of partner agencies like the World Food Program. All three streams produce documents that outlive any single hearing. The Secretary's testimony will be read against those documents as they emerge over the next several months. That is why the exchange is more than a moment of drama. It is a setup for a longer accountability process. Budget fights inside congressional hearings are common. Most of them are forgotten within the news cycle. This exchange will land harder because it has the two elements that make a hearing memorable. The first is a specific public commitment that can be checked. The Secretary's prior statement about no children dying on his watch is on tape. The second is a specific human cost that has a name and a photograph. The combination is unusual. When a specific commitment fails for a specific person who can be named, the exchange escapes the news cycle and becomes part of the institutional memory of the issue. That is the role this exchange will likely play in subsequent debates about American food assistance. There are three markers worth watching after this exchange. The first is whether the administration releases the internal impact analyses Amo asked about. If they exist, releasing them is the cleanest way to refute the blind cuts claim. The second is whether independent organizations like the World Food Program publish their own assessments of the gap between the prior funding level and the current one. Those organizations have the granular data the public conversation needs. The third is whether the president's home state and the secretary's home state see specific economic responses from the affected agricultural producers. If they do, the exchange becomes a domestic political issue, not just a foreign policy one. There is a broader governance lesson worth sitting with. Statements made under oath in front of congressional committees are part of the public contract. They are not advertising, they are not press releases, they are testimony. When a future hearing returns to those statements, the country has every right to ask whether they held. That is true regardless of party. It applies to administrations of every ideological persuasion. The mechanism only works if Congress is willing to do the work of returning to prior commitments and checking them against subsequent reality. Amo's exchange was a small example of that work. It will land or fail based on whether the documents that follow support either his framing or the Secretary's. Give the Secretary his due. He came into the room defending a difficult set of policy decisions. He argued that the United States remains the most generous donor in the world. He argued that the new programs are designed to work better than the old ones. He argued that other wealthy countries should share more of the burden. Those are real arguments. Amo did not deny most of them. He pressed on a different point. He pressed on the gap between a specific promise and a specific outcome with a specific name attached to the outcome. Neither side gave ground. The record holds both. The documents that follow will move the conversation forward in one direction or the other. Step further back. Hearing transcripts are part of the permanent archive of how a country governs itself. They are read by historians, by aid agencies, by future officials, by journalists writing post-mortems. What gets entered into that archive matters more than the news segment that follows the hearing. By placing the prior promise, the headline budget numbers, the named child, and the contested death figure into a single 5-minute congressional exchange, Amo created a structured archival record. Decades from now, when researchers reconstruct how the United States handled this period of foreign assistance reform, this transcript will be a primary document. That is the highest use of the format. So the final accountability question is the one Amo pushed throughout. What was gained, what was lost, and who is paying the cost? If the gain is a leaner, more focused American foreign assistance program that delivers stronger outcomes per dollar and is matched by burden sharing from other wealthy nations, then the administration has a serious case to make. If the cost is 23,000 displaced American jobs, lost market access for American farmers, an unverifiable promise to the world's most vulnerable, and named children who did not survive the transition, then the case becomes much harder. The committee should make both sides put their numbers on the table. Then the public can decide what kind of policy it is actually buying.